Well, hey everyone, and welcome back to Dive Deeper.
How many of you are still tracking with us in the readings each week?
Remember, we're always trying to take one step closer to Jesus. So I hope you're seeing improvement each week, not only in how many days you do the readings, but also in the quality of the time that you're spending with God.
Yeah, I hope you're hearing from God. I hope He's teaching you things, and I hope you are beginning to see your heart change and become more like Jesus.
Right. And this is one of the cool things about writing in your Dive Deeper journal. It can help you to see how you've been growing closer to Jesus. Check this out. Do you see this thing here? This is my journal. I hope you recognize maybe this book and have been using your own. Anyway, I can open up to this and I can see that on, let's say, February 4th, God was teaching me about trusting in Him and not in myself. And then I can ask myself, how have I been doing with that? Have I noticed these changes, or have I maybe just reverted back to my old ways?
This way, the things that you're learning don't just get lost and forgotten. You can remember them and continue to grow in your relationship with Jesus.
That reminds me of something though. These journals, they're super important and we want you to continue writing in them, but they're pretty small.
Right, and some of you probably write a bunch. And so if you are running out of space, we have more journals. Just ask your leaders if you need one and we'll hook you up.
Okay, so why don't we get into our warm-up question this week?
I have been loving the weather this past little bit. The sun and the warmth have been awesome.
Yeah.
I've been getting so excited for spring and summer. I've had my barbecue out 3 or 4 times already.
Yeah, no, I've been really excited too. So have you guys been enjoying the weather? Why don't you guys discuss this question? What are you most looking forward to doing this spring? And then tell everyone why as well. All right, Oliver, what stood out to you this week?
Okay, this is one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible. It's Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. Can you read it for me?
Yeah, for sure. Philippians 1:21 says, "For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better."
Okay, so that might be a little confusing. Why is Paul talking about living and dying?
Well, when Paul wrote the letter to the Philippians, he was actually in prison and he was waiting for his trial in court. And he could be condemned to death. So he was kind of anticipating whoa, I might die soon.
Yeah, so he's like, oh man, I might die soon, but you know what? If I die, I get to be with Jesus in heaven. And so that's actually sweet. And that's what he means when he says dying is even better.
Right, and so many people are so afraid to die. People talk all the time about eating healthy food and exercising because it helps you live longer. People are so afraid of the idea of dying because they think that it's just the end, that after death they just stop existing.
Yeah, and if that was true, of course we would want to avoid dying so that we could have as much fun as possible, I guess. But Paul says that he believes that dying would actually be even better than living, because he would get to be with Jesus in heaven. And he knows that that will be way more amazing than anything we can experience in this life.
Yeah, so he's not afraid to die, but he's not feeling suicidal either. He says if he gets to live, that means living for Christ, which is also awesome. Paul actually says later on, he hopes he keeps living for a while so that he can continue to help the Philippian Christians keep growing closer to Jesus.
Okay, so here's what I want you to talk about. Me and my wife Lindsay, we actually host a small group for other young adults at our church, and we've been studying the book of Philippians together. And in the book that we've been reading that explains Philippians, they talked about this verse, and they said something that really struck me, and so I wanted to share it with you. They were talking about how Paul said to live means living for Christ, and to die is even better. And another translation says to die is gain. And they commented on how people who aren't Christians, their main goals in life are to have fun or popularity or success in their job or to make a lot of money or romantic relationships. Those are people's goals. And they had this great point where they said, if you live for fun, to die is to be eternally bored. If you live for popularity, to die is to be alone. If you live for success, to die is to be a failure. If you live for money, to die is to be broke. If you live for romantic relationships, to die is to be dumped forever. But if you live for Christ, to die is gain. To die is even better because you get to live with Jesus.
So all those other ways to live are empty in the end. In the end, they satisfy for a little while, but they don't offer any hope beyond death.
Yeah, living for Jesus is the best way to live because it is the fullest, most satisfying life right now. It is fun. It gives you amazing friendships and purpose and fulfillment, absolutely. But also, it gives you hope that when you die, being with Jesus forever in heaven will be 1,000,000 times better than anything you can experience in this life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let's stop to discuss that. Here's the question. How do you feel about Paul's attitude that dying would be even better than living because he'd get to be with Jesus in heaven? Okay, so what stood out to me was this theme that I saw through the 3 chapters we read of Philippians. And it was selfishness, unselfishness, or selflessness. Whatever term you want to call it, I was just really impacted by God speaking to me about the idea of being selfish.
Okay, yeah, so that's something Paul talks about a lot in these chapters. What was God saying to you about it? What were the verses that he used to do that?
Yeah, so there are actually a few spots where I saw God talking about this, but one was in Philippians 1, where Paul talked about desiring so much to be with Christ, but being torn because he also knows how much people here need him around. Like Oliver talked about that verse a little bit.
Yeah, like that seemed pretty radical. Even just the desire to be with Christ that much, it is pretty incredible. But then also to value other people more than that desire is amazing.
Yeah, it sure is. Like, Paul really impresses me, but that isn't the scripture I want to talk about. Let's look together at Philippians 2, verse 3.
Here's what that verse says. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves and not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others.
Thanks, buddy. You crushed it. All right, that verse really caught my eye as I was reading for a couple of reasons. The first was that, I don't do this well. Paul tells us to do nothing out of selfish ambition.
Yeah, not just try not to, or not just do some nice things for others here and there. No, he tells us to do nothing out of selfish ambition.
Yeah, to me, that sounds crazy. But the other reason that this verse stood out to me was that it's the opposite of what I think our culture tells us to do. The world values the self and our own personal desires above really anything else. I think about the idea of you do you, or a call to do whatever makes you happy. We live in a pretty self-centered world.
Now, some of you might not know what selfish ambition means. When Paul talks about selfish ambition here, he's talking about acting out of your own interests, looking to do things with only yourself in mind.
Right, the word ambition is kind of similar to a goal, except ambition is more to do with your heart, and a goal is more to do with a thing. So you might have a goal of being the top student in your grade, and so a goal is something you hope to achieve. But ambition is more like something you have or a state of your heart. So if you had ambition for the goal of being the top student in your grade, that would mean you would desire to study and work hard, to choose to study over, doing other fun things, or to make sacrifices to other things like friendships to achieve your goal. That's what ambition would be.
So to have selfish ambition would mean that your heart is primarily concerned for your own self, for your desires and your goals and your dreams. What Paul is warning against here is a state of our heart that is selfish.
Right. So Paul isn't saying you need to never take actions with yourself in mind. We all have needs. We all need to eat. We need to sleep. We need time alone. And we need to do things that are fun. And all of those things are good.
Right. Following Jesus doesn't mean you don't take care of yourself. Jesus tells us to love your neighbor as yourself, which means we need to also be loving toward ourselves.
Okay, now I want to talk just a little bit about how I applied this to my life. God really challenged me on this idea of selfishness this week. I realized that there are so many things that I do out of selfish ambition. Even with my relationship with God can be out of selfish ambition. I spend time with God not because I love him, not because I desire to please him, but so that I can have an inner peace, or I can have the blessings of God. And if I'm honest, a lot of the time I'm the most important thing to me. And God was showing me that I need to practice humility and learn to act out of a godly ambition instead of a selfish ambition.
Thanks for being real and honest about that, Caleb. I think if we were all honest, a lot of us could find places where we have selfish ambition.
Yeah, so why don't you guys discuss that? How are you selfish? All right, guys, I hope you had an awesome discussion talking about that question. And it's now your turn. It's time to get out your journals, and I hope that you guys have some things that God's been teaching you to share with the group.
Yeah, and so take out your journals, look back through what was God speaking to you about this week, and how is he challenging you to live. And I encourage you, share that with each other, and then also, respond to each other. Like maybe God is going to speak to you through what one of the other people in your group shares, and just continue to discuss that. And so I hope that you benefit from each other sharing this week. All right, well, have a good discussion. See you later.